Greetings and felicitations, my friends. Welcome to another episode of Star Trek Revisited with me, Peter. In today's episode, I'm going to be reviewing a first season episode of Star Trek, the original series, in this case, the one titled Miri. I'm going to try and keep things a little bit shorter in this one because I've realized as I've been going that I've been getting too much into deep dive description of the episode and not enough of what I set out to do, which is things I like, things I don't like, and then some trivia added in. So I'm going to try and keep this a bit shorter. So without any further ado, let's get started. I'm going to start with a piece of trivia, and that is the fact that this episode, Miri, was one of 4 Star Trek episodes, which was banned in my country, the United Kingdom, by the British Broadcasting Corporation, or the BBC, for over 20 years. And the reasons are rooted in how the show was perceived and regulated at the time. BBC considered Star Trek to be a children's show, and they treated Star Trek as suitable for children and scheduled it accordingly. Because of this, episodes with what they perceived with dark and disturbing themes were scrutinized more heavily than they were in the United States. So, from the BBC's perspective, Miri features a deadly pathogen that causes grotesque lesions, children attacking adults out of fear, a child dying after being stunned by Kirk's phaser, adults driven into violent madness due to the disease. And these elements were deemed too unpleasant for young viewers. There were also some viewer complaints, and after its initial UK airing in 1970, the BBC reportedly received a large number of complaints and responded with a stock reply stating that the episode dealt with, most unpleasantly, with the already unpleasant subjects of madness, torture, sadism, and disease. Miri was one of 4 episodes that the BBC banned, and the others were Plato's Stepchildren in Season 3, The Empath, and Whom Gods Destroy, both also in Season 3. So 1 from Season 1 and 3 from Season 3. And we will dive into each one of those, obviously, as we go through this and explain the reasons why those were banned. The ban was eventually lifted for all of these episodes in the 1990s, and Miri was shown on UK television again, including on niche channels like the Horror Channel in the 2000s. Something that I'm not keen on as we start this episode is the opening shot of the Enterprise. For a shot that was remastered, I don't think it was particularly compelling or exciting. As the Enterprise is approaching this planet, we note on the bridge that we don't have our usual Mr. Sulu at the helm, and we don't have a notable guest navigator either. I don't know who these guest actors are particularly, but we do have Eddie Paskey there as Mr. Leslie in the background at the engineering station. And in this opening shot, we get Kirk and Janice Rand on the bridge. Janice, as ever, wearing her trusty tricorder. As they're approaching a distress signal, which they ultimately deem via Spock to be a planet, we do get a glimpse of a familiar face sitting at the communications station. This is the 3rd and final appearance of Lieutenant Farrell, previously seen in Mudd's Women and The Enemy Within at the Navigator station, now here seen at communications. And I'm going to continue my opening theme of things that I dislike. We're not getting off to a good start, and I must say that this is not and never has been one of my favorite episodes. There are many things that I do not like about this episode. I try to go back into it with an open mind, and we shall see as we go if I succeeded in any way, shape, or form with that. But we ultimately come across a planet which Spock relays is an exact duplicate of the Earth. And to me, this is really not something that I ever enjoy. I don't enjoy episodes of Star Trek, the original series, where they go into Earth parallel planets, especially ones where we visit the sort of sets that we will see in a moment as we move further ahead. Janice Rand exclaims, "Earth," as if it actually is the Earth, which of course it isn't. Something I do like, after the credits, we get the opening shot and the title with a lovely remastered shot of the Enterprise in a classic orbital position. I think this looks really nice. Something that was effective storytelling is the fact that Kirk elects to beam down and investigate this Earth-like planet from which they are receiving this signal. This is something that I would have liked to have seen more careful consideration of, but clearly they need to move the plot ahead. So beam down they do. And this leads to another dislike for me, and that we move immediately into this Paramount backlot set, which would become very, very much a staple of episodes where we end up on these Earth parallel type planets, as we will see in episodes like A Piece of the Action and Patterns of Force, and the god-awful Return of the Archons, which is coming up later in season 1. I don't know how I'm going to get through reviewing that one because I absolutely despise it. So Miri was not actually filmed on the Paramount lot itself. It was instead shot on the 40 acres backlot in Culver City, California, which was owned by Desilu Productions at the time and later absorbed into Paramount. The episode used the Mayberry set, famously seen in the Andy Griffith Show, which is something that I've never heard of. Apologies to US folks who might be watching this who are screaming at me right now, but as a Brit, quite a lot of your entertainment just never reached here. The section of the backlot was repurposed to represent the Earth-like planet inhabited only by children, as we would come to find out. And you can apparently even spot Floyd's barbershop from the Andy Griffith Show in the background, unchanged from its appearance. So while Desilu and Paramount were connected, the actual filming of Miri took place off the main Paramount lot on a separate but affiliated backlot. Let's get some notes on our landing party, and this is trivia more than anything. I do happen to like it. It's a like from me. Our landing party consists of our big three, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. We get Yeoman Janice Rand, who, this is a rare outing for Janice, and it's one of the few positives for me of this episode, and that she gets a lot to do for a change. And we are accompanied also by 2 security guards. We will see the first appearance of David L. Ross as Lieutenant Galloway, or Galway, as Kirk would sometimes refer to him as, particularly in an episode in season 2 called The Omega Glory. David L. Ross would have many, many appearances throughout seasons 1, 2, and 3, mostly named Lieutenant Galloway, sometimes just credited as guard or transporter technician, and one particular episode he was named as Lieutenant Johnson. So various different roles for him, but a familiar face, almost as familiar as Leslie and Lieutenant Brent throughout this run. The other security guard, I believe, is that familiar face that we actually see more of in season 1 than I actually ever recall. I believe it's Sturgeon from The Man Trap, the phaser control room technician from Balance of Terror, the officer on the lower decks who spotted Dr. Simon Van Gelder in Dagger of the Mind, and here he is now popping up as an unnamed security guard. We get a lovely shot here of Galloway wandering through the streets of this Earth 1960s abandoned city, and he's holding a Type 2 phaser in lovely red uniform and the little orange sash onto which the phaser would clip. I do have to give a little bit of a like here, in that setting up what the story is develops reasonably quickly here. And as they're exploring this seemingly deserted planet, they spot an old tricycle, which they all examine one by one, and then it's handed to McCoy. And then out of nowhere, this creature appears, yelling and screaming. Kirk punches this creature and at least 3 times, and then the figure starts crying and sobbing and saying, "It's broken, you broke it, somebody please fix it." And then the creature dies, and they then hear the voices of children singing somewhere in the distance, so they run off to try and find the source of this. Kirk here in this particular shot with the Type 1 phaser in hand. This is notable for the first season in particular, where senior officers would typically carry this Type 1 phaser and security guards would carry the heavier Type 2s. They enter an establishment. We get the reveal of Miri, this terrified young-looking girl, and they reassure her and try to calm her, and she relays to them that all the grown-ups are dead, or grups, as she describes them. And we get more scene setting for this episode. And I have to give it credit, it is some good storytelling here. The scene is set very, very well, that there are only children left here, and the adults, or grups, are, at this moment, these terrifying, disfigured creatures who go around yelling and screaming and attacking each other. Now, one thing that I don't like from the get-go is my perceived creepy stance that Kirk has towards this young girl, Miri. It comes across as very inappropriate to me. I think William Shatner is trying to portray it as more fatherly-like. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but it comes across that he's almost flirting with her a little bit and teasing her about how pretty she is. And he's clearly doing this for a purpose. He's doing this because he wants to get information from her, gain her trust, which, yeah, that's a thumbs up, I guess. It makes sense, but the way he goes about it doesn't come off quite right to me. Something else I like, Spock in the meantime has been sent out with our 2 security guards who don't actually die. Yay! We get 2 red shirts who make it through this episode intact and are not killed off, so bit of a change there. And we can see here Spock has the Type 1 phaser, and the guards, well, at least we can see Galloway is holding the Type 2 there again. But one thing I really like here is that Spock instinctively protects his 2 colleagues when there is disruption from above and objects are thrown from above at them. I really like that Spock instinctively acts with protection towards them. I mean, why wouldn't he? But it's a nice little touch nonetheless. As Kirk continues his very uncomfortable flirting with this young girl, Miri, who clearly is developing a liking for him as she's transitioning from being a girl into a young woman, we get the big reveal of the episode that not only has something gone very, very wrong on this planet, but it's now affecting our landing party, and Miri reacts in horror when she sees that Kirk has this same affliction on his hand. And this is where our scene setting is really complete, and we go to an ad break. Glorious shot of the Enterprise can be seen, which is a thumbs up here. A lovely shot of it in orbit, and this is the same sort of shot that we'll get throughout the episode now. It's pretty standard, and it's not one of the better ones for remastered effects, and nor does it need to be fair, because there's little going on in the way of other space vessels or dangers to the Enterprise itself. It's simply orbiting a planet here, so I think that's fair. I like some of the early communications that we get between the Enterprise and the landing party. Lieutenant Farrell at communications, talking to Dr. McCoy and then Kirk about initially their needs. McCoy needs portable computer equipment to analyze this virus that they now seemingly are all infected with the notable exception of Mr. Spock, whose green blood seems to make him immune to this, as it will do in many cases throughout Star Trek, the original series. This is a precedent that will occur many, many times. Farrell has volunteers ready to beam down, which I love this. I love that this is a crew that is there for each other. There are volunteers ready to help their captain and their landing party. I also love Kirk's response to this. Under no circumstances is anybody to beam down to this planet and put themselves at risk. There's enough to Kirk that his landing party has been infected and that Spock is a carrier and he has the problem down here on the planet to solve. Prime Directive notwithstanding at this point, we haven't really got into that yet. But the one thing that I maybe would comment on here as a slight red flag and maybe is a bit of a dislike is, why could volunteers not beam down from the Enterprise wearing environmental suits? They could clearly use all the help they could get if they could set up some sort of area where the environmental suited crewmen and women could beam down and work and have those sort of precautions in place. I don't see why that wouldn't be helpful in this situation. The explanation of what is going on this planet comes to our landing party as they scan through documents and records from the now deceased adult population of this area of this planet. Presumably this has happened all over the planet as well. We're only, after all, focusing on one small city in this example. But the explanation is that they were working on something called a life prolongation project, and it's determined that it was triggered by introducing new forms of viruses and bacteria into the population as a means to prolong life. And whilst that element of it seems to have been successful, it did have the unfortunate side effect that the adults, upon reaching adulthood, would quickly turn into these legion-covered, mindless, attacking creatures who very, very quickly then died. The children, however, would go on to have very, very long childhoods, as Spock comments to Yeoman Rand in this particular shot, that Miri is almost certainly at least 300 years older than she is, which is quite extraordinary. Kirk tries to get Miri to show him where some of the other children are, and this does not succeed for quite some time, and we get, for me, some annoying scenes. I just don't care for any of the scenes with this group led by a very fine actor, I have to say. This is a like for me, the actor who played Jan, which is spelled Jahn. And he was played by the very distinctive-looking Michael J. Pollard, who was born in 1939 and sadly passed away in 2019. Very, very wispy-haired looking individual, and made him very easy to typecast as described here in IMDb as impish or eccentric characters. One of my particular favorite roles that I remember him being in was in the movie Roxanne with Steve Martin and Daryl Hannah, where he played one of the firemen, and he plays a really good part in that film. And that movie itself being a comedic reinterpretation of Cyrano de Bergerac. But the scenes with the children just irritate me for some reason. I don't know, they always did from the first time I saw this episode. And bit of nostalgia here, actually, is the band episodes. The 4 band episodes in the UK was something of a myth and a legend here when I was growing up. It was hard to get a hold of them and see them, but they were released on home video, and I did have the opportunity to go and rent them from a video rental store close to where I lived. And naturally, I took a copy of them, as I had the ability to do so at that point. To record onto another video cassette and keep a copy, which was great. So it was a real treat seeing those 4 band episodes, but this was not one that I really enjoyed from the get-go, I'm afraid to say. We get another example of, as I've already mentioned earlier in describing this episode, this young female individual, much like Miri, a little bit older than her, transitioning into adulthood, and she comes in and attacks Kirk and Miri, who've entered this building where the children are hiding, and as Louise appears, the children run off terrified, and Kirk has to fire his phaser and kill this unfortunate young individual. The pace of the episode here just gets really frustrating for me, actually, as well. It's just very, very slow paced. It's quite boring and repetitive as Kirk and Spock and McCoy are pondering over these books and papers, trying to find a solution to their problem. And then we get a massive thumbs down here in that our child antagonists, for now at least, have decided that how they will fight back against this mysterious group of new grown-ups that have suddenly appeared in their environment is that they will distract them. Then while they're distracted, they will go in and steal their communicators so they can't communicate with whoever they're talking to from their perspective. And this is all too easy. A, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy shouldn't be fooled this easily. B, this sets up the plot device that for the bulk of the rest of this episode, our landing party is cut off from the ship and cannot communicate with them. So the first problem I have with this is A, the carelessness of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, who should know better. B, at this point in time, our security guards are nowhere to be seen. They're presumably out creating a perimeter, patrolling, searching for the children with their weapons, and presumably their communicators. Why would they not have their communicators? This is a massive error, in my opinion, so that really bothers me. Before they lost the communicators, they determined from their last communication with the Enterprise's computers that they have 7 days to solve this problem. And at least the pacing here does skip ahead a little bit, and we jump to, I think, the 3rd day of the 7 left available to them, and we can see that our crew are getting a bit testy, shall we say. Kirk has his uniform zip undone a bit on his collar. They're all looking a bit disheveled. He brushes past Janice. She gets really upset. And this actually does lead to a scene that I do quite appreciate. And it ties into that whole chemistry thing between Yeoman Rand and Kirk, in that she's very, very upset that she has this happening to her. Of course, anyone would. And she relays to him that back on the ship, she used to try and get him to look at her legs. And she says, Captain, now look at my legs. And it's covered with these lesions that are spreading all over her body. And this leads to jealous-looking Miri now looking on at them. She's developed this very strong affection for Jim, as she calls him, and she does not like the yeoman getting the attention of the captain. Skipping forward a short while again, we do get to the point where Spock and McCoy have a eureka moment. They don't really adequately explain what it is they found. They just say, Jim, I found something, and it doesn't really get scientifically explained any more than that. But there is a relief that they can now produce a serum. All the while we have Miri, who has somehow managed to slip away from Kirk and party. Again, another thumbs down from me. They're not very alert here at all, are they? I mean, I suppose I can excuse them because their faculties are no doubt being compromised by the disease at this point. But Miri nonetheless has managed to slip away and find a group of children and talk to them and share her plan, which is to kidnap Janice, basically. To lure Janice away by saying that one of the younger children has had an accident, so that's their plan, and go about it they will. Then we get the magic serum, which has been somehow produced in super quick time. I don't quite know where the materials have come from to produce this serum. Maybe they were available in the laboratory, although surely after hundreds of years they would not be in the greatest of condition. Either that or they were beamed down from the Enterprise before they lost communication with the ship by carelessly losing their communicator. So they got this serum now, and the problem is they don't know the dosage. They know that it'll work, but they don't know what the dosage is. They're going to need the ship's computers to determine that. Kirk, meanwhile, is hysterical at the fact that Janice is missing, and he gets annoyed with Miri because he knows that Miri's behind this somehow, and he's not accepting Miri's bullshit answer that she's not, to be honest. And then we get to a pivotal moment in the episode where he shows Miri that she has these lesions now growing on her arms, and how she's not noticed the size of it just yet at this point, unless she had, and she's just hiding from it. She's just been in denial this whole time. But I just find this whole episode just very, very annoying. And it continues as such, where we've got the children in this classroom environment with this particularly annoying young man saying study, 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 or bonk, bonk on the head, and he just gets right on my nerves. And we see that they've managed to execute their plan to kidnap Janice. They've got her restrained with not the best looking restraints. I don't think it would take too much effort for her to escape her bonds here, but I guess they've overpowered her. There's enough of them to overpower her, so what would be the point? Kirk arrives with Miri. Miri, realizing she's now going to be a grup or a grown-up, has relented, and she takes Kirk to where the children are hiding out. And what follows is actually quite good when we get there, but annoying the time that it takes to convince the children, because initially they don't listen to him and to Miri, who is now on Team Kirk and wants them to listen to the fact that they're all going to grow up and get this, and the young ones will all be alone. They bonk Kirk on the head, and it all just drags on a little bit too long, this scene, for my liking. And Kirk rips his sleeves off and shows his arms and emotionally says, "Look at my arms! This is what's going to happen to each of you unless you let me help you." Miri shows John the lesion on her arm, says, "Look, it's in me. It's happening to me. This is going to happen to all of us." In the meantime, back in the lab, we've got Spock and McCoy waiting to hopefully get the results of Kirk's endeavors to go and get the communicators back so they can verify the serum and the dosage of it. McCoy says we can't wait any longer. Spock says we must. It's easy for Spock to say this, actually, because he's not about to die. McCoy is getting quite desperate here, and this leads to an act of desperation for him as Spock goes off to check on the captain's progress. he decides that he's going to guess the dosage amount, and he injects himself with it. He screams in agony after doing so, calls out for Spock, who turns away from his conversation with Galloway and returns back, finds him on the floor. Kirk then arrives back with the whole group of children. Quite a bizarre sight seeing him carrying one child with his sleeves all destroyed on his uniform. Kirk really does love to destroy a uniform, doesn't he? It's the one occasion where his tunic gets torn and it doesn't result in him showing off his torso. It actually looks quite silly, to be honest. He enters, they've got the communicators back, the children have obviously relented, and he sees McCoy on the floor, and he says, "What happened?" And Spock just relays that he must have injected himself with it when he wasn't looking. But as they watch him, they notice that the lesions are fading, or the blemishes are fading, as Spock describes them. So McCoy's got very lucky here, basically, and he's guessed near enough the right dosage. Kirk looks relieved, and the children gather together, and John says to Miri, "Is this supposed to be a good thing, Miri?" To which Miri says, "Of course it is." And Kirk walks by, he taps the child on the head, looks at Miri, and thank goodness we get to the end of this episode. We see the Enterprise leaving orbit on the bridge. They're discussing the fact that they're leaving behind only children with a medical team that they have left behind. But Kirk then, here's a little piece of trivia, he says that he's already contacted Space Central. So at this point in time, we still haven't settled on the final name for Starfleet Command or the United Federation of Planets. We've still got USPAR, the United Earth Space Probe Agency, and Space Central in this case. And Space Central will send back scholars and whatever else, and truant officers, McCoy pipes up. And we end the episode with the fact that Miri really loved Kirk, in the words of Janice. She really loved you, you know. And Kirk does a little smirk and says, "I never get involved with older women, yeoman." And we end the episode. And we end it in the way we ended the previous one, with Kirk again ordering Spock to go to Warp Factor 1, which again is a bit weird to me, given he's the science officer, not the helmsman, but he is the first officer. So, but this, I think, would be the last time we would see this. They did this at the end of 2 episodes, and very likely just because they didn't have the regular helmsman, although it would have been very easy for Kirk to say, "Warp Factor 1, please, hell." The episode is directed once again by Vincent McEvedy. I'm not going to go through how many episodes he's directed because we've done it so many times now. He's done many in seasons 1, 2, and 3. I will note that this episode was produced by Gene L. Kuhn, who would become a very, very important figure in Star Trek, the original series, particularly in season 3. The music for this episode was composed and conducted by the original composer, Alexander Courage, and we do have some very good themes in this episode, as ever. Our main guest star, Kim Darby, played Miri. She was the child of professional dancers and began her career studying dance with her father, as well as someone called Nico Charisse. At 14, she was granted special admission to Tony Barr's acting workshop at Desslu Studios on the Paramount Pictures lot. The other main guest star, as we've already mentioned, was Michael J. Pollard playing John. A look at some of the other credits on this episode. We had some individuals playing John's friend and boy creature and blonde girl. And we'll note here that we had Stephen McKeeverty as red-headed boy. I'm going to presume that he was the son of the director, Vincent McKeeverty. We've got David Ross there as security guard 1 in this case, not named Galloway yet. Jim Goodwin in his final appearance as Farrell, and John Megna as Little Boy. This doesn't tell the whole story of the guest children actors in this show. And the young boy wearing the tin helmet, he would go on to have many appearances in various versions of Star Trek in later years. The first one following this would be Trainee Foster in Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, the officer, or the cadet rather, who challenges Kirk on the bridge saying, "Are they planning a reception for us when we get in? A welcoming ceremony?" And Kirk replies, "Well, God knows there should be. We paid for the party with our dearest blood." He also would go on to play Thopok, a Klingon in Deep Space Nine, who was the guard of Lady Grilka in the episode Looking for Parmak in All the Wrong Places, which is a really good, funny episode. He also played a Jem'Hadar officer in another episode of Star Trek, Deep Space Nine. And then his final appearance would be in Star Trek Voyager, where he went on to play a really, really moving role as Lieutenant John Mark Kelly, an astronaut that the crew of Voyager discovered in their voyage in the Delta Quadrant many, many centuries later. Now on to more of the children. William Shatner's children appeared in Miri, at least some of them. Leslie Carol Shatner played one of the onlys, and she is the eldest daughter of William Shatner. And then Elizabeth Shatner also appeared as one of the children. She is the middle daughter. We also need to mention his third daughter, Melanie Shatner, who, although she wasn't in this particular episode, she would eventually appear in Star Trek herself many years later in Star Trek V: The Final Frontier as Kirk's personal yeoman. And one final note on this is Scott Dweck, pictured here, is the son of Grace Lee Whitney, who plays Janice Rand. He was also one of the children featured in Miri and would later have a scene in Star Trek The Motion Picture as a Vulcan member of the Enterprise crew. Now, the last thing we have to do here is to give my score on this episode. On IMDb, this gets a score of 6.9 out of 10, which I think is quite high, to be honest. I'm going to take that down to a 5. It's got its moments, but overall, I really dislike this episode and I could do without it. I've watched it many times. I probably hadn't planned to ever watch it again, except for doing this episode, this reflection. And it's not really given me any renewed enthusiasm for it. So a 5 is all I'm willing to give it. And there we go, another episode in the bag for season 1 of the original series. I do apologize if you think I was being a little too negative on this one. Let me know what you think in the comments. Have I been a little bit harsh on Miri? I've never liked it. I don't think I ever will. It annoys me. I don't know why it annoys me that much, but it just does. Thankfully, the next episode that we've got coming up is one that I really do like. It's called The Conscience of the King, and it's a story that will set some of the backstory for James T. Kirk, our intrepid hero captain, played by the great William Shatner, of course. And I look forward to that one. Before I wind it up, actually, I've just remembered one more thing I should have mentioned about the children in Miri, is that at least one of Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek's children, did play one of the children there in this episode as well. So just remember to mention that. Anyway, I thank you for watching. Please give me a thumbs up. Please give me a subscribe if you wouldn't mind. That would help me a lot. And I will wind up by saying, you all take care, stay safe, travel well, and above all else, live well and prosper. Bye for now.